Good afternoon, everybody. This is, of course, a very new experience for me. I have never participated in a meeting like this. And I believe that for my colleagues who will speak later this afternoon, it will be equally interesting and equally new. Now, the question before us is China's road and prospect. And obviously, this is a question which many people ask themselves. Many people in every corner of the world, and that is because China has become a world leader, one of the world leaders. Whatever happens in China has an effect on other countries. But before I say something more about my own perspective and my own experience, I think I should introduce myself. I should tell you a little bit about who I am. Because I believe in conversations like this or in any other conversation, it is very important that, the participant first says, well, who am I? What makes me relevant for this discussion? What is the angle from which I talk? Now, I should also tell you this. I was invited to speak as former President of the Republic of Slovenia. But that's only part of the explanation. The other part of the explanation is that I worked for many years for the United Nations. United Nations obviously is an organization which is very dear to China. China is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, therefore belongs to 5 most important members. China belongs to members that decide on war and peace to the extent these decisions are shaped by the Security Council. And looking from Slovenian perspective to that very important international body, we see the critical role of China for the future of the world. But my experience in the United Nations has been also more personal, because I was serving on the Security Council as a member representing Slovenia, a non-permanent member, elected for 2 years back in 1998 and 99, and I worked with my Chinese colleagues very directly. And I learned to appreciate, I learned really to like the openness and equal status discussions that we have had. China never had any particularly strong feeling that as a big power it doesn't have to listen to smaller countries. And that was a very important experience that I had. So when I approached the question of China's road and prospect, I approached from that angle also. That China is actually prepared to engage with other countries and with peoples from other parts of the world fairly friendly, on an equal footing. This is a great asset which makes a conversation possible. Later on, I worked as Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for Political Affairs, and I often visited China. Myself, whenever I came to Beijing, it looked to me as this was a new city, growing, becoming more and more impressive. Now, that gave me the third perspective of China as a country where you would not necessarily convince your interlocutor, your partner, that something is really as important as you think. But if they find out that it is important, they would also decide very quickly on what exactly has to be done, and they will implement that decision very energetically. So that idea of implementation was very important. Now, why I'm telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because this is the basis from which I proceed when we talk about China's roads and prospects. You see, in the United Nations, we learned that China has been a major factor in global improvement. Now, as you know much better than me, the changes in the last generation has been enormous in China, and the fact that hundreds of millions of people were brought from poverty to better living standards was a huge success. But what is less known is that that huge success also gave a great deal of content, a great deal of success to what was called Millennium Development Goals. In the year 2000, the UN adopted a series of objectives on reduction of poverty, improvement of education, improvements in other areas of social life and development. And then when 15 years later we studied the results, it was realized that there has been big progress, but that much of that progress depended on what happened in China. For the people in China, of course, a large population, and also indirectly for people in other countries. So again, we have seen the importance of progress of China for the rest of the world. And that was the spirit in which the current program was negotiated, the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of 17 goals which cover all major objectives, from such things as elimination of poverty, access to water, equality of men and women, and other objectives. And here again, it was very well understood that much of that future, which has started in 2015, 2 years ago, will depend on what happens in China. It was taken for granted that development in a big country, in a unique country like China, automatically trickles down to everybody. But then it was discovered that this is not necessarily the case, and that it is necessary, it is important to have measures which would reduce the levels of inequality, which will improve social services, which will improve education, improve health service, bring into the picture care for the elderly in new ways. Nevertheless, we have seen this transmission or movement of emphasis from economic growth to questions like social justice, questions like innovation, and furthermore, technological change that would produce a new type of development, green development, development which is much more friendly to environment, which not only conserves what has to be conserved from environment, but also restores what was damaged at the time of this enormously speedy growth of economy and development of China. So we have seen in the 13th five-year plan an important emphasis, important new emphasis. We know that we foreigners, that the next party congress, which is going to take place in a few weeks, will be also influenced by the five-year plan, the whole thinking which has been happening in China about the development prospects and the changes in the nature of priorities. And we believe that this will be important. Again, coming back to my own perception, I very much rely on the demonstrated ability in China to implement what is decided. This is not necessarily the case in every part of the world. We have many countries where nice decisions are taken when people think, well, you know, that's how we are going to develop, and then not much is really carried out. We know that the growth rates in the world have been slow, very low, that China has retained high growth rates irrespective of its environment, which was not conducive to helping high growth rates in China, but irrespective of certain slowdown, the growth rates are still close to 7%, which is very high. We understand, obviously, that there are certain parameters which have to be taken into account. For example, China is an old civilization. It has 5,000 years of history. And there are certain civilizational factors which inevitably have an influence. Yesterday, I was witnessing a ceremony of freshmen in Wenzhou, in China, in the business college, where it was quite interesting to see how much attention was paid to parents of freshmen. And that I found quite interesting and quite moving, watching all these young faces in the square and a certain number of their parents with them. and the fact that they promised that they will study hard and they express gratitude to their parents. Now, this kind of culture is much less, how should I say, much less determining in the parts of the world where I come from. Obviously, respect for parents is there, but I have an impression that it is higher here. And of course, this is very important for social cohesion, for implementation of noble sustainable development goals, implementation of social fairness, and so on. One just needs to read China Daily, which I do whenever I come to this country. And in China Daily you will find stories about difficulties which young people have when they get married and they need an apartment. Now this is a problem which is very well known in my country also. And I know that nowadays younger generations have some problems which my generation did not know. When I was young, it was easier to get an apartment. It was easier to have a job, and the job was permanent, more or less. Now everything has become much less certain, and I believe that this global tendency will have an impact on younger generation in China also. I have seen this in the newspapers. I asked questions when I met some people who were prepared to give me the answers. They told me, yes, the prices of apartments are very high and there is a problem which affects particularly young people and has an impact on their organization of family life. How can a young person plan his and her life and family and children and everything if the apartment is too expensive, if banks do not provide appropriate credit, if the job is uncertain? So this is a problem which I believe from the media that I follow to be a serious one, and the way how it will be addressed depends on, of course, on decisions in China, including the decisions of the party Congress.